Whenever I'm asked who my biggest influence is as a singer-songwriter and country musician, the answer that always comes to mind first is Hank Williams. But it almost seemed too obvious. It seemed like that's everyone's most loved and influential country singer to some extent, and so why make a video about him if everybody already knows him and his music? But he really is such a huge influence on me that I felt it was important to represent him in this series. So Hank Williams was born in 1923 and grew up in Alabama. And he took guitar lessons as a kid from a black blues musician and street performer named Rufus Payne. And when Hank was about 13 and 14, every day after school he would go play guitar in front of the local radio station. And eventually they noticed him and let him try out playing on the radio. And it had a really good response. People loved his music. And so the radio station ended up giving him his own 15-minute slot twice a week. And that allowed him to be successful enough to form a band and start touring around Alabama. So he started a band called the Drifting Cowboys with some other young teen guys, and they did really, really well. And so Hank ended up dropping out of school by the time he was 16 to tour full-time, and his mother became his manager, negotiating pay and booking gigs for them. And Hank was born with a condition called spina bifida, which gave him a lot of back pain, kind of chronic back pain, that he would self-medicate with alcohol and drugs. And that was kind of a common problem for, tortured, musically talented, artistic teens, but extra for him. And when World War II came along, he lost pretty much all of his band members to the draft. They all had to go off and serve in the war. And Hank didn't have to because of his medical problems, but he did have to replace all of his band members, and he had a really hard time finding band members that would put up with his alcohol problem. They just would not last very long. But he just continued making music, and in his early 20s, he met a woman named Audrey, who he would soon marry, and she became a really important encouragement, and she became his manager and got him to try out for all these things. And he auditioned for the Grand Ole Opry and was rejected, but then Audrey had him go play for Fred Rose, who had just started an important country music publishing company with Roy Acuff called the Acuff Rose Music. And Fred Rose really liked what he heard, and so he offered Hank a 6-song contract. And that was very, very successful, which led to Hank getting signed with MGM. And he just had hit after hit. He was so huge and popular and really breaking even out of the country scene. People who had not been as interested in country music before were now listening to it because they loved Hank Williams so much, and he was just so accessible and just really moved so many people. He also started kind of a side project with the alter ego called Luke the Drifter. And as Luke the Drifter, he did these really dramatic religious recitations where he would talk about the Lord and religion and praying and philosophy in this really dramatic voice. So they were kind of like songs, but kind of like poems. And his marriage with Audrey was always turbulent, and Hank was always having troubles with alcohol and was in and out of rehab, but was kind of finally getting better around the age of 29. But then he had a hunting accident where he fell and really injured his back again, and it just brought all of the back pain problems back, and he got back into alcohol again and went to see a doctor who was actually just a quack and had a fake degree and prescribed all of these really dangerous extreme medications at once to Hank Williams. And so when he was on tour that last time, even though he eventually got accepted to the Grand Ole Opry once he became so huge and popular, but he ended up losing his job with the Grand Ole Opry because of his alcohol problems and being unreliable. And so on just this tour in the winter when he was age 29, he had just taken too many things at once and was being driven to his next gig and just died of heart failure because of too much morphine and alcohol and all these other things that were not supposed to be in his system all at once. So even though he was only 29 when he died, he left such a huge legacy of music for the style and for songwriters, and just everyone's been influenced by him, and his music is still as powerful and loved almost 100 years after his birth, and all of his kids and grandkids ended up being country musicians. So he really was this node of influence in the country world, and definitely an influence on me. And now that I'm a country musician, as an adult, I have learned many, many Hank Williams songs over the years. But when I was a kid, I didn't know that much about country music or where to find it or who the main singers were. I just knew I liked it when I would chance to hear it. And I remember every once in a while I would hear this one Hank Williams song that I really liked. It was one of my favorite songs ever, but it was just up to chance that I might hear it. But now that I know who wrote it and where to find it, it's, a lot more accessible to me. So this is a Hank Williams song that I really, really loved as a kid, called Why Don't You Love Me Like You Used to Do. Well, why don't you love me like you used to do? How come you treat